The sun over Dry Creek burned white as bone. Dust hung in the air like smoke, turning every breath to grit. On the raised wooden platform, Clara Wynne stood barefoot, wrists bound with coarse hemp rope. The crowd pressed close, miners, ranch hands, drifters with whiskey on their breath, all waiting to see the day's shame. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the square. "Debtor's daughter. Healthy, knows her chores, decent cook." Laughter followed like a slap. Clara kept her head down. Sweat rolled past the dirt on her neck. Her dress, once pale blue, had faded to the color of sky ash. She clutched the thin chain around her throat, the silver locket her mother left her before fever took her. Inside were two tiny faces, worn smooth from years of thumb rubbing. That little oval was all she had left that still felt human. "Let's start at $20, the auctioneer barked. "20 for the girl who cost her daddy his ranch." Someone spat tobacco at the dust. Another whistled. "10, a voice said. "She ain't worth more'n that." The men laughed again, and something inside Clara shrank smaller than her own shadow. She told herself not to cry. Crying only made them grin. From the edge of the crowd came the low creak of saddle leather. A rider dismounted slowly, tall, broad-shouldered, coat dust gray, hat pulled low. Elias Ward, though she didn't know the name yet. The crowd parted a little when he walked through. He carried quiet like a weapon. The auctioneer brightened. "Well now, Mr. Ward joining us, folks." "The silent rancher himself." No answer. Only boots against planks, steady as thunder far away. Elias stopped at the platform. His eyes, gray like rain that never came, studied Clara for a long moment. No hunger in them, just weariness. "Maybe pity. 15, he said, the crowd murmured. One man snorted. "She ain't worth feeding, Ward. Leave her to the saloon." 17, Elias said again, unmoved. The auctioneer shrugged, hammer raised. 17 once, twice, a sharp voice cut in. Deputy Hollis, badge catching sunlight. "Ward, you sure you want this trouble?" "Sheriff says the girl's got history." Elias didn't look his way. "So do I." The gavel fell. "Sold to Mr. Ward for $17. The sound cracked through Clara's ribs like a gunshot. Hands shoved her forward. The rope bit her wrists. She stumbled down the steps, nearly falling. When she looked up, Elias stood waiting, payment already handed over. His expression hadn't changed. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking. "Don't hurt me." "I'll work." Elias cut the rope with a small hunting knife. The blade gleamed once, then vanished back into his coat. He said only 3 words, "Come home then." The words landed heavier than chains. She didn't understand what kind of man would buy silence with silence. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Someone muttered, "He's lost his mind." Another laughed, "Better dig her grave next to his wife's." Elias led her to the waiting horse. A black gelding pawed at the dirt, nostrils flaring. He lifted Clara into the saddle without a word, then mounted behind her. His hands never touched her skin, only the reins. Still, she felt his presence like heat through winter wool. As they rode away, the town's noise faded into wind. Boards creaked behind them as doors closed, gossip already spreading like wildfire. The deputy stood on the platform, arms folded, eyes narrow. "She won't stay gone long," he said under his breath. "Ghosts never do." They passed the last building, the saloon with its broken sign, and the open plains stretched ahead. The sky turned copper, the color of old blood. Clara looked once over her shoulder. The town shrank to a smear of dust, the auction block a splinter against the sun. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. "Home," Elias said. The word sounded strange on his tongue. She almost believed it, almost let the wind wash the ache from her chest. But when she touched her locket, the clasp was bent, half broken. It would not close. Behind them, far back at the edge of town, a rider on a bay horse sat watching. The deputy, badge glinting once before he turned toward the sheriff's office. The papers on his desk named Clara Wynne wanted for debt evasion and theft. He smiled thinly. "Let her think she's safe," he muttered. "We'll come calling soon." Clara didn't see him. She only felt the chill settle deeper as they rode into the dying light. A silence between them wide as the plains. Somewhere behind, the auctioneer's hammer still echoed in her mind, counting down a past that refused to stay buried. The trail out of Dry Creek wound like a scar across the land. Cold wind carried the taste of iron and dust. Clara rode ahead of Elias Ward, her back stiff, hands trembling around the reins. The auction's echo still rang in her ears. Every hoofbeat sounded like judgment. They said nothing for miles. The sun sank low, bleeding orange over the horizon, painting the sagebrush in rust and gold. The only sound was the creak of saddle leather and the long sigh of the wind. When Clara's shoulders shook from the cold, Elias said nothing. He only reached forward and draped his coat around her. It smelled of horses, smoke, and rain long past. She wanted to thank him, but couldn't find her voice. He slowed his horse to match her uneven pace. The silence between them wasn't cruel, just heavy, like the pause before thunder. After a long stretch, Clara gathered courage. "Where are we headed?" "Home," he said again, the same way he'd said it in town, like the word hurt to speak. She watched him from the corner of her eye. His face was carved by sun and grief, his jaw lined with gray stubble, eyes lost somewhere far away. They passed a broken fence, boards splintered and sagging. Beside it, half buried in dust, lay a small wooden horse toy, one wheel missing. Clara looked down at it, heart twisting. Elias followed her gaze. "My boys," he said quietly, "used to race that thing through the yard." "Before," his voice caught. "He didn't finish. Before his mother?" she asked. He nodded once. "Sam, he's 8. Don't talk much anymore." The words settled like ashes between them. The land rose into scrub hills, then dipped into a lonely valley. No lights, no voices. Only the call of a crow circling overhead. When the house came into view, Clara almost missed it. Gray boards the color of the earth, roof bowed under years of weather. A porch lamp swung weakly in the wind, flame flickering like it wanted to die. Elias dismounted first and offered her a hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, rough from labor. Not cruel, just real. Inside, the air was stale. Wood's cold, dishes stacked untouched, the faint smell of kerosene. Curtains hung limp and unwashed. A single rocking chair moved gently on its own, creaking with every gust that slipped through the walls. Clara stood there, arms crossed tight. "I can work," she said softly. "Clean, cook, whatever needs doing." "I'll earn my keep." Elias gave a slow nod. "You do what you need." He showed her a small room off the kitchen. The bed sagged in the middle, a single quilt folded at the foot. She placed her satchel down. Everything she owned fit inside: a comb, a ribbon, and the bent silver locket. Through the cracked window, she saw a small graveyard near the trees. A white wooden cross leaned slightly, a name barely legible: Anna Ward. Clara swallowed hard. She wasn't the only ghost here. Later she found the boy. Sam stood in the doorway, thin as a reed, eyes large and silent. He stared at her, then at the locket at her throat. Before she could speak, he vanished back into the hall. Night fell heavy. The wind whistled through the rafters like whispering voices. Clara sat by the small stove, clutching her hands for warmth. She heard Elias outside, boots crunching over frozen ground. A moment later, his low voice drifted through the crack in the wall, rough, uncertain. "I don't know why I brought her here," he said. Clara froze. The tone wasn't cruel, only lost, like a man praying to the dark. She leaned closer to the window and saw him kneeling by a grave marker, hat in hand. She turned away, throat tight. Whatever this place was, it wasn't safe. Not for the heart, at least. Then came a sound, a scrape, a breath. From the barn, across the yard, a shadow shifted. Too tall to be the boy, too still to be the wind. Clara held her breath. The lantern flame trembled. Someone was watching the house. The days slipped by like slow-moving clouds. Clara rose before dawn, lit the stove, and tried to stitch life back into the dead house. She scrubbed the floors, mended shirts, and hung linens that smelled faintly of old cedar. The walls stopped echoing so sharply when she walked through. The ranch was quiet. Only the low moan of wind through the eaves and the occasional whicker of horses broke the silence. Yet bit by bit small sounds returned. The clatter of dishes, the crackle of a fire that no longer burned just for one. Sam, Elias's boy, began to linger near her. At first he only watched from doorways, face half hidden. When she hummed an old lullaby, his eyes flicked up, curious. One afternoon, while she kneaded bread, he reached forward and touched the silver locket at her neck, just a brush of his small fingers before darting away. It was enough to make her heart ache in a new, gentler way. From outside, she'd sometimes feel Elias's gaze through the window. He never said much. Just stood, arms folded, as if guarding both of them from something unseen. His silence was no longer a wall. It was a kind of truce. The rhythm of the ranch steadied. Wood chopped, horses fed, meals shared in near silence. For the first time since the auction, Clara slept through the night, until the rider came. It was mid-morning when hoofbeats thundered down the lane. The dust rose white against the pale winter sky. Elias stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. The rider, one of the sheriff's men, didn't dismount. He handed Elias an envelope sealed with red wax, the mark of law. "She's not supposed to be here," the man said. "You can't hide what she's done." Clara froze in the doorway, heart pounding. Elias didn't answer. He tore the letter open, looked at the first line, then shoved it into the fire barrel beside the porch. The paper curled and blackened, smoke rising slow and gray. The rider spat, turned his horse, and galloped back toward town. Clara watched the smoke twist into the cold air. It smelled like burnt paper and fear. "What did it say?" she asked. Elias looked at her, eyes unreadable. Nothing worth keeping. He walked away before she could speak again. That night, the wind carried whispers from the barn. Boards shifting, something moving. Clara peeked out the window but saw only the darkness bending the snow. She told herself it was just the horses. As the first snow began to fall in earnest, the ranch turned white and still. Each fence post wore a cap of frost. The creek froze around the edges, whispering under its thin crust. Clara found a strange kind of peace in the routine. Firelight, warmth, quiet. Elias spent more evenings by the hearth, shoulders slumped, lost in thought. Once she caught sight of a photograph on the mantel, a woman smiling beneath a sun hat, arm around a small boy. Anna Ward. The glass was cracked across her face. Late one night, Clara woke to the sound of wind battering the shutters. She padded softly into the sitting room and found Elias asleep in the rocking chair, the fire dim to embers. His head was bowed, a folded photograph in his hand. His chest rose and fell with the deep, unguarded breath of exhaustion. For a long moment, she just stood there. Then she lifted a blanket from the couch and gently draped it over him. Her fingers brushed his, calloused, warm. He stirred but didn't wake. When his hand twitched, he didn't pull away. Outside, flakes drifted past the window, slow, deliberate, like ash from some far-off fire. Clara turned to leave, and something caught her eye. Through the frosted glass, faint and deliberate, she saw boot prints trailing from the barn toward the creek. Too large to be Sam's. Fresh. Her breath hitched. The lantern by the door flickered once, then went out. Somewhere beyond the white silence, someone was watching. The storm came without warning. By dusk, the wind screamed through the valley, ripping shingles from the roof and shaking the walls like the fists of God. Snow drove sideways across the yard, turning fences into ghosts. The horses whinnied in panic. Clara and Sam fought to shutter the windows, but the cold slipped in through every crack. Elias didn't rise for supper. She found him in the barn earlier, coughing hard, eyes glassy. Now he lay in bed, skin flushed with fever, breath ragged. "Don't need a doctor," he muttered, voice slurred. "Just a night's rest." But when she touched his forehead, heat burned beneath her palm. The blizzard howled louder. Outside, the world vanished in white. Clara stoked the fire, set a pot of broth on the stove, and sat beside him. He tossed in his sleep, mumbling words that barely made sense. "Anna, Sam, forgive me." She wiped his brow with a damp cloth, whispering, "You have to hold on, Elias. You brought me here. Don't leave me now." He didn't answer. His hand clenched around hers like a drowning man. The hours stretched thin. The wind became a living thing, battering the house, testing its bones. Sam curled up by the door, wrapped in a blanket, eyes wide with worry. Clara found an old Bible on the shelf, its cover worn smooth by years of use. Inside the front page was a faded note in delicate script. "To Elias, all my love, Anna." She began to read aloud. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied with the rhythm of the words. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." The storm outside raged, but the cadence of her voice filled the room like the sound of rain after drought. Sam drifted to sleep. Elias's breathing slowed, the fever breaking into sweat. Clara spooned broth between his lips, coaxing him to drink. The color began to return to his cheeks. When he opened his eyes again, Dawn was bleeding pale light through the frosted glass. He blinked, weak but aware. "You sound like her," he said quietly. Clara froze. The words struck something deep, a wound she didn't know she still carried. She set the bowl down and turned away, fighting tears. "I'm not her," she whispered. "I know," Elias said, voice rough. "But you've got the same strength." The room fell silent except for the faint hiss of the fire. For the first time, she believed he saw her, not as a servant, not as charity, but as something worth saving. Later that morning, the storm eased. Snow blanketed everything, soft and clean, as if the world had been forgiven. Sam trudged in from outside, cheeks red, something small clutched in his mittened hand. "Found this?" he said, shyly holding it out. It was the silver locket, the one Clara thought she'd lost weeks ago, the one that had vanished after the auction. Snow clung to its hinges, but it still caught the light like a tiny piece of moon. Clara opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, beneath a smudge of frost, were two faces. Her parents, smiling in a photograph so old the paper had begun to fade. Before the debts, before the cruelty, before the world turned on them. For the first time since her father's death, she let the tears come. Silent at first, then shaking. The locket lay in her palm like a heartbeat. Elias, still resting, watched from his chair. He didn't speak. He only looked at her the way a man looks at sunlight after too long underground. He saw not a fragile girl, but someone who had walked through fire and still reached for warmth. When her sobs finally eased, he said quietly, "Keep it close." "You earned it," she nodded, fastening it around her neck. The metal was cold, but it steadied her. Outside, the storm's edge broke apart, revealing the blue-white calm of morning. Snowdrifts shimmered under a sky scrubbed clean. The ranch looked almost peaceful, reborn under silence. Then Clara heard it. Faint at first, distant, hoofbeats, carried on the still air. Slow, measured, coming from the ridge. She stepped to the window, squinting through the light. A dark figure on horseback moved along the horizon, stopping to look down toward the house before disappearing behind the rise. Her breath fogged the glass. The storm had passed, but something else was coming. Elias stirred behind her, murmuring her name in his sleep. She touched the locket once more, whispering a prayer she hadn't spoken since childhood. The snow outside glowed pure as forgiveness. But the echo of those hoofbeats promised the past wasn't finished with them yet. The fire crackled, throwing flickering shadows across the walls of the cabin. Outside, the wind had died to a low sigh, leaving a frozen quiet. Clara sat on the edge of the hearth, knees drawn up, hands clasping the silver locket. Its cold metal pressed against her palm, grounding her. Elias sat opposite her, shoulder slumped, eyes reflecting the firelight. He had been silent most of the day, tending to chores, Sam, and the animals. At night, the quiet pressed in on both of them, heavy with unspoken truths. "I need to tell you something," Clara said, voice almost swallowed by the fire's hiss. She drew in a shaky breath. "About why I was sold." Elias nodded once curt, eyes never leaving hers. "My father." She paused, jaw tight. "He was framed, beaten, killed over debts he never owed. I tried to defend him. Slapped the banker's son. That's when they sold me. I wanted to protect him, and I failed." The fire crackled. Silence stretched, thick as smoke. Elias's jaw tightened, his fingers flexing against his knees. His eyes darkened with recognition. "Greaves," he said quietly, almost a growl. "Harlan Greaves." Her throat went dry. You know him?" "I know the man," Elias said, voice low, voice like gravel over stone. "He tried to take my ranch 5 years back. Cattle gone, fences burned. My wife—" His words faltered. He swallowed. "She didn't survive the winter after that. Broken spirit, fever, grief. Sam nearly lost me too." Clara's hand brushed the locket, her knuckles white. I didn't know." "No," he said, eyes softening just a fraction. "And now I swear, no harm will touch you under my roof. Not from Greaves, not from anyone." For the first time since the auction, Clara allowed herself a small, tentative smile. Her chest felt lighter, as though some unseen chain had loosened. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought I was alone." "You're not," he said simply. "And you never will be, not here. Not while I draw breath." They let the silence settle, warm and fragile like a tentative truce. Sam's soft breathing came from the corner where he'd fallen asleep under a blanket, curled tight like a small animal. The room smelled of smoke, pine and iron, safe enough almost. Then it broke. A scream. High roar. From the barn, Clara bolted upright, heart thundering. Sam's voice, or someone else, echoed across the yard. The lanterns flickered violently as if sensing the danger, shadows stretching like claws. Elias leapt to his feet, the chair toppling behind him with a crash that sounded louder than the wind outside. He grabbed his rifle from the rack by the door, coat flaring as he pushed past her. "Stay inside," he barked. Clara wanted to follow, but her feet were frozen in the thick wool rug. She pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide, breath shallow, hearing the snow crunch outside beneath hurried boots. Gunfire cracked in the darkness, sharp, immediate. A bullet thunked into the porch, splintering wood. Elias shouted, and then a second shot followed. Clara's hands gripped the locket at her throat, cold and hard, as if the small piece of silver could shield them from what was coming. The firelight danced, painting the walls in frantic patterns. Shadows leapt, stretched, collided with the cabin corners. She heard Sam crying from the corner, small and terrified, and felt the wind whine through the broken shutters. Her pulse hammered in time with the gunfire. Every instinct screamed danger. Whoever had come, they weren't just thieves. Not just townsfolk. Harlan Greaves' men, or worse. Elias's voice rose again, steady and commanding amid the chaos.
"Clara, stay back!"
She pressed herself low, listening to the staccato of rifle fire, the shouting, and the creak of the barn doors under stress. And somewhere in the storm of noise, the symbolic silver locket felt like the only constant, the tether that reminded her of home, of family, of survival. Outside, hoofbeats thudded in the snow. The world had turned against them in one night. And yet, Clara's heart knew something. They would survive. Somehow. But the night was not done with them yet. The morning sun struck low across the snow, turning the white drifts into sheets of silver and shadow. Clara stepped outside, breath steaming, to take in the aftermath of the night's violence. The air smelled of smoke, gunpowder, and iron. Near the barn lay the first man. His body was still, face pressed into the frozen dirt, a rifle fallen from his grip. Blood had darkened the snow, stark against the pristine white. Another man's horse galloped off into the ridge, hooves sending sparks of ice into the air. Clara's stomach clenched. Elias knelt beside the fallen man, hands quick and methodical. He dug a grave behind the fence, scraping frost-covered soil, leaving the corpse to rest beneath a small mound. Once finished, he placed a stone at the head. "Do it right," he muttered, not looking at her. He had a name. Not just a target. Clara shivered, hands trembling as she helped push the dirt, the cold biting through her gloves. Her fingers brushed the frozen earth, then the man's coat, and she looked up at Elias. He stood tall now, jaw tight, eyes hard with resolve. War had come, and they were standing at its edge. By midday, the barn doors hung loose. The horses nickered nervously, and Sam peeked out from the house, cheeks pink with cold and fear. Clara brushed the snow off her coat, fingers curling around the silver locket. Its smooth surface glinted in the sunlight, a reminder of survival, of connection, of hope. That night, the wind had eased to a whisper. Inside the cabin, Elias handed her a revolver, polished and heavy. "Here," he said. "You need to know how to protect yourself." Clara stared at it, fingers hovering over the trigger. Her hands shook, not just from cold, but from fear. "Pull," he said. "Steady, breathe, don't aim to kill. Aim to protect." She raised the weapon, the firelight reflecting off the barrel. Her first shot rang loud in the snow-filled yard, echoing against the hills. She flinched, but Elias's calm presence steadied her. The next shot, steadier, sent a hollow thump into the target log, again and again. Each pull of the trigger brought a small, fierce confidence, as if the act itself transferred strength to her bones. By the time she lowered the revolver, her chest heaved, but her eyes burned with determination. They shared tea beside the hearth after, a quiet ritual amid the drifting snow. Clara held her cup, watching the steam curl into the dim firelight. Elias stirred his own slowly, glancing at her from the corner of his eyes. The locket rested on her chest. Silver caught the flames, reflecting in shards across the room. It gleamed like a small, fragile promise, proof that even in the storm of violence, some pieces of life could remain whole. Sam slept in the corner, bundled like a little ghost, breathing evenly. Clara sipped her tea, warm liquid sliding down her throat, and for a moment, the world felt safe, almost normal. The peace was fragile. Clara sensed it, every shadow cast by the fire, every creak of the wooden floor. She knew the past had not released its grip. And then she saw it. A small scrap of wood nailed to the barn door outside, a dark, jagged shape against the white snow. She leaned closer, breath fogging the glass. The letters scratched into the plank made her blood run cold. "You have something of mine." Clara's hand froze over the locket. The silver felt heavier, warning and omen. Elias glanced up from his cup, eyes narrowing. "Go check it," he said, calm but hard. His jaw was set, hands brushing the edge of the rifle resting against the wall. Clara swallowed hard, heart hammering, and stepped toward the door. Outside the snow glistened under the moon, white and pure. Yet the threat was real, tangible, and near. The past was not finished with them. She touched the locket one last time before opening the cabin door. The cold bit her cheeks. The wood creaked under her weight. And the message waited. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft whistle of wind through the barn slats. Clara's eyes narrowed. Whoever left this knew exactly what they wanted, and now the war had truly begun. The wind tore across the valley, carrying the stench of snow, sweat, and gunpowder. From the ridge, a cloud of dust rose, horses pounding the frozen earth, hooves sending frost into the air. Clara squinted against the sun, heart hammering. 6 riders approached, leader tall, broad, and unmistakable. Harlan Greaves. His black coat flapped in the wind, hat pulled low, eyes glinting with cruelty. He reined in his horse at the edge of the yard, the others fanning out behind him like wolves circling prey. "She belongs to me," Greaves called, voice carrying over the frozen field. "The law's on my side. Hand her over." Clara felt Sam clutch her skirt, small hands tight, trembling. She straightened, the silver locket cold against her chest, a pulse of courage. Elias stepped in front of them, rifle raised, jaw set. His eyes never left Greaves. "Not out here," Elias said quietly. Each word like a stone dropped into the snow. Greaves sneered, spurs jangling as he nudged his horse forward. "You'll regret this, Ward. You know who you're defying." Elias shifted, boots crunching in the frost. His rifle glinted in the sun, muzzle catching light. Behind him, Sam pressed closer to Clara, and she wrapped her hands around the locked locket, a tether to her parents, to survival, to defiance. Clara's voice cut through the cold, sharp and steady. "You want what's yours? Come take it." The words startled even herself. She had never spoken like this, never faced a man who saw her as property, and yet something inside her roared, fueled by loss, courage, and the fire of the plains. Greaves barked orders. His men spurred forward, guns leveled. The wind snatched at the horses' manes, the snow swirling like blood over the valley. Elias's finger rested lightly on the trigger, unflinching, steady as a rock in the storm. He didn't shout, didn't move until the first shot cracked the frozen silence. From the edge of the ridge came unexpected voices. Other ranchers, drawn by the noise, emerged behind Elias, rifles raised, eyes hard with resolve. They had heard of Greaves's terror before, knew the man's reputation, and they would not let him take another life, another girl. The odds shifted. Dust and snow churned, reflecting sunlight off steel. Elias glanced at Clara, and she nodded, gripping the locket like a banner. "Steady," he murmured. "Don't panic. Watch them." The first gunshot rang across the valley. Snow sprayed up from hooves, hitting horses' flanks, stirring panic. Greaves cursed, his men faltering under the sudden presence of more rifles, more eyes, more hands ready to defend. Clara felt her stomach tighten as adrenaline surged through her. She had never fired a weapon, yet the locket warmed against her chest, grounding her. She drew a deep breath, letting courage fill the space where fear had been. Sam's small voice trembled at her side. "Clara." She bent to him, brushing snow from his hair. "Stay close." "Watch me!" Greaves spat and motioned for a charge, but the ranchers pressed forward, forming a protective line. Horses whinnied, riders yelled. Snow whipped past, the world narrowing to the glint of guns. the wind's howl, and the pounding of hearts. The standoff held, tense and taut, a frozen tableau of courage against cruelty. And then gunfire cracked again, sharp, sudden, and terrifying, echoing across the valley like the roar of distant thunder. Clara flinched. The locket catching the sun once more, glinting like defiance itself. She realized then that this was no longer just about survival. It was about claiming her voice, her life, her place in a world that had tried to strip her of everything. Elias's figure loomed between her and Greaves, calm and unyielding, rifle ready. The snow beneath his boots sparkled red in the first trickle of blood that had begun to mix with the white. The wind carried Greaves' curse, but it carried another sound too, the unity of those willing to stand against him. The hard edge of frontier justice, the echo of courage born in a silver locket. And in that moment, Clara understood the battle had begun. The threat had returned, but so had the will to fight. Gunfire echoed again across the valley, sharper, louder, closer. Snow and dust swirled, and the world felt as fragile and as alive as the silver glint at her throat. The dawn was sharp and white, snow drifting across the valley like ghost feathers. The wind carried gunpowder and frozen breath. Bullets tore through the cold, whistling past the wooden fences and kicking up sparks of ice from frozen earth. Elias grunted, a grunt of pain that carried more weight than any shout. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, burning through muscle and sinew. He staggered, swaying against the fence post. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. "Elias!" she cried, but he only shook his head. "Keep low, move!" With trembling hands, she grabbed the rifle he handed her hours ago. Each pull of the trigger sent her heart racing. Snowflakes whipped her face, wet and sharp, but she didn't flinch. The first shot rang out, echoing off the barn walls. The second, the third. She could hear the bullets splintering wood, the horses panicking, the screams of men falling into the cold dawn. Elias dragged himself beside her behind the fence, blood seeping through his coat. His eyes met hers, sharp, fierce, unwavering. "Steady," he whispered, hand gripping hers to guide her aim. Beside the barn, Sam huddled, clutching the chain of the silver locket she had left for him. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched, small and still as chaos unfolded outside. The locket swung gently in his hand, a heartbeat in the frozen morning. Greaves's voice cut through the storm, cruel and sneering. "You think he'll die for you?" Clara froze, heart twisting. The black-coated man advanced, revolver raised, boots crunching the snow like the drum of doom. She pressed herself to the fence, fingers tightening on the rifle, eyes stinging with fear and defiance. Then Elias appeared, staggering forward, blood streaking his face, coat shredded. His eyes burned with something raw, untouchable. "No," he said, voice ragged but steady. "I'll live for her." Clara felt her chest swell, tears pricking her eyes. The courage that had been flickering inside her ignited. She stood, rifle aimed, resolve hard as iron. The world narrowed, the snow, the guns, the shadow of Greaves advancing. One shot. It rang sharp, a splinter in the frozen air. Another followed. The gunfire echoed like a drumbeat of fate. Greaves stumbled, eyes wide, revolver slipping from his grasp. It sank into the mud beneath his boots, dark and final. The surviving men hesitated, then fled, hooves pounding in retreat, snow spraying like sparks into the cold morning. Silence followed, a trembling, fragile silence. Snow fell softly again, coating the earth in white, endless and forgiving. The wind carried nothing but quiet, a lull after the storm of bullets. Clara dropped to her knees beside Elias, pressing her hands against the wound in his shoulder. Warmth from her palms mingling with the cold blood. His eyes found hers, softening. The hard edge of the frontier melted into a rare intimacy. "You're home now," he whispered, voice rough, carrying the weight of battles fought. Fear and hope reclaimed. She shook her head, trembling, unable to speak at first. Her fingers brushed the silver locket she wore around her neck. Cold, steady, a reminder of survival, of family, of the home they had carved from the wilderness. Snow drifted across the yard, settling over the barn, the fence, and the earth where Greaves's men had fallen. Even the bullet holes in the wood seemed softened under the delicate white. Sam emerged slowly, eyes wide, clutching the chain of the locket she had left behind. He approached, small and tentative, and pressed it into her palm. She smiled, brushing his hair back. Elias leaned against the fence, coat torn, shoulder bleeding, but alive. The fire of his spirit burned as fiercely as the day they first met. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed at peace. Then came a sound, a faint echo, distant but unmistakable. A chime carried across the valley, soft and metallic, rising above the drifting snow. Sirens, church bells? Clara couldn't tell, but it sliced through the morning silence like a reminder that life beyond the ranch still moved, still watched. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Elias caught her gaze. Half-smile cracked across his bloodied face. "We're not done yet," he said, voice steady, almost teasing. Clara tightened her grip on the rifle, the locket warm against her chest, and nodded. The snow fell softly, covering the world in white. But the echo of bells, or warnings, reminded them that survival, courage, and love had to be earned every day. And the frontier had not finished testing them yet. The valley had softened under spring's touch. Snowmelt ran in silver threads through the fields, feeding the creek where Clara now knelt, hands in the damp earth. Green shoots pushed through thawing soil, and wildflowers bloomed, delicate and stubborn, in places where the winter had left only gray. Sam's laughter rang across the ranch, bright as the sun. He chased a young foal through the meadow, arms outstretched, boots kicking up mud and petals alike. Each time he stumbled, he rose again, unhindered, eyes sparkling with freedom. Gone was the boy who had hidden behind walls of fear. The tragedy and terror of the past felt distant here, softened by life returning to the land. Clara tended a small garden by the creek, the very spot where Sam had found the silver locket in winter's chill. She knelt among the blossoms, pulling weeds and pressing seeds into the soil. The sun warmed her shoulders, and for the first time in months, her hands were steady, her heart light. The locket, resting on the table beside her, caught the sunlight, glinting like a promise. Elias approached, the sound of his boots muffled by soft earth. His arm was still stiff, scarred by the bullet that had nearly ended it, but his step was sure, careful. He stopped beside her and held out the silver locket, polished clean by time and care. "Keep it," he said quietly, voice low but certain. "It's always been yours." Clara's fingers closed around the cool metal. She felt its weight, not as a burden but as a tether to survival, love, and a home reclaimed. A smile curved her lips, gentle and unguarded. She fastened it around her neck, letting it rest against her heart, where it had always belonged. Behind them, Sam let out another laugh, a wild, joyous sound, as the foal nipped at his heels. Birds called from the treetops, and the wind carried their songs across the creek. The air was alive, fragrant with damp earth, blossoms, and freedom. Elias stood beside Clara, arm brushing lightly against hers. His presence was quiet strength, the same way he had stood over her in the winter storm, over gunfire, over fear. She leaned into him, just a fraction, content in the knowledge that he was her anchor. Together, they walked back toward the house. The fences were rebuilt, straight and solid, lines of white posts cutting through green. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the barn door swung gently in the wind. Life had returned to the ranch, scarred but resilient. Clara's gaze swept across the valley, the creek glimmering in sunlight, the wildflowers swaying in the breeze, the hills rising like quiet guardians. Here the world had healed, or at least it had begun to heal. The shadows of winter remained only in memory, softened by snow and courage. She reached for Elias's hand, and he took it, calloused and warm. They moved in step, the locket gleaming against her chest. Its silver reflected the light, a symbol transformed, once a reminder of pain, fear and loss, now a sign of home, of survival, and of a life earned. Sam ran ahead, laughter echoing like a bell, and the wind carried it, scattering it across the fields. Birds sang, horses neighed, and the ranch breathed again, whole and alive. Clara paused on the porch, looking back at the creek, the garden, the small patch of earth she had tended so carefully. Life had returned. The past had been faced and survived. The locket rested against her chest, warm, steadfast, gleaming in the sunlight, a final, enduring echo of hope. She turned to Elias, and he nodded, understanding passing silently between them. They had been forged in fire, snow, and gunfire. Now they walked forward together, the world vast, the valley theirs, and peace at last within reach. The wind carried laughter, bird song, and the scent of wildflowers. Home had been reclaimed,